In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the turn signal switch on your Toyota Camry. It sits on the left side of your steering wheel and helps you turn on and off your turn signals, but also your headlights, so it's important that it functions properly. Let's get started. Because we have to remove the airbag for this procedure, it is very important to disconnect the battery and cut all power to the airbag system. Having said that, take a 10mm wrench or socket and loosen up the mounting nut for the battery terminal, the negative terminal that is. Just give it a couple turns until you can pull it off, and then push it to the side safely so it can't bounce back on and make connection. Now is a good time to clean off your battery terminal if it has a lot of corrosion. Mine's good, so let's continue. Having waited for a while in order for the airbags to be completely drained from any capacitors that they still have current in, usually you would want to wait about half an hour at least in order to get everything properly drained. Having said that, we need to pop off this cover here, and there's going to be one symmetrically on the other side. If you have cruise control, it'll actually be on the cruise control lever. Use a little pocket screwdriver and pop this cover off. This will expose 2 out of the 3 clips that we have to pry on with a little screwdriver in order to release the airbag / horn pad off of the steering wheel. I can show you a lot more details once the airbag pad is actually off of the steering wheel, but for now, what you want to do is take a screwdriver or a pick, and you'll see that little tab here. This is actually a lever, a spring-loaded lever that you have to pry upwards like this and pull out on the airbag pad at the same time. Once you do that, try not to press it back in. It won't clip in by itself unless you push it. So now this is the bottom tab that we released, and now there's one on each side. They basically form an upside down triangle. Turning the steering wheel is going to allow you to see the top pin. On this one, you're going to have to pry or push inward. There we go. Without even prying, it just released. So now we have one last one. I'm going to spin the steering wheel all the way around so you can see what I'm doing. This is now obviously upside down because it's on the driver's side, but this is your cruise control switch. If your vehicle has one, it's going to look like this. If it doesn't, it'll just be a plain cover. Pop this cover off. This one's a little bit more difficult to see because of the cruise control switch, so I'm going to give you a view of what it looks like once this is completely disengaged. There we go. Pops right out. Now there are wires attached, so be careful. Very carefully flip it up. There are 3 connectors we have to remove at this point. One is this black wire here. There's going to be a little tab. Press it in and pull it off. This is for the horn. To remove these connectors, you have to get a pocket screwdriver or a little pick. Pry up on these. Once these are up like that, it'll unlock the connector itself. Just like that. Now you should be able to pull straight out on these, or just pry them out very gently with something. 1 and 2. Now you want to store this safely facing up. Never face it down like that, because if for some reason it happens to blow up, it will shoot up in the air. If you face it down, this is where it blows up. So put it face up like this, away from you on a flat surface. Now let's unplug some of these connections here, move the wire aside so you can see them right up here. I'm just going to unplug all of them. These go through the clock spring. This one can stay. Actually, this is going to just slide through the steering wheel. If you want to disconnect it, go ahead, but I'm just going to leave this one attached. So now all of these wires will go with the steering wheel, and this one will stay and go through the steering wheel. Speaking of removing the steering wheel, there's a 19mm nut here, so let's unbolt it. It should not be very tight. At this point, you should be able to just tap on the steering wheel side to side. That should break it free from the splines down here. Oh, there we go. All right, so at this point, you can mark it if you want, or remember that you have your wheels perfectly straight, positioned straight. Don't move the vehicle. Don't turn the steering column. Just pull this out. Try not to spin the clock spring. Pull these wires through. The clock spring does have a stop, or a lock, I should say, so that is going to prevent it, but don't force it. Also, at this point, like I said, don't spin the wheels for any reason. Don't move the vehicle because it will offset the steering column position. Now let's remove these 2 Phillips head screws that hold the clamshell cover for the steering column on. Now you should be able to separate these. If you can't by hand, just use a trim tool, pry them apart. The top will go up and the bottom will come down. There we go. The top doesn't have to be completely removed. It's actually held on with this piece of cloth here, so just flip it up and out of the way. Now let's unplug all the connectors that are down here. This one, you'll have to slide down on the center piece. That should allow you to unplug it. This is for the airbag, that's why it's yellow. The rest are just a simple squeeze and pull type connector. And there are two more right over here. All right. That should be everything. Now we can free up the clock spring. The clock spring will have a tab at the top that you can pry upwards. That'll pop it up at the top. And then one on each side you can pry down on. So once you take it out, you can see 1, 2, and 3 tabs right here. Those are the ones you want to pry apart to release it. And here is our switch assembly. Now the turn signal switch is going to be this whole assembly. We'll have to pull this switch off, but the bracket for this switch is actually part of this one. To remove this switch, you'll be able to get the lock off, or the little locking tab off, with a pick. Basically, you want to pry out on this tab. That'll release the one behind it. Hook on a pick, and that should release that. Now you can pull this off. Now unplug the connector for the combination switch here, or the turn signal switch. Now there are 2 tabs that you need to pry. One at the top, pry up. One at the bottom, pry down. That will release the assembly here so you can slide it straight out. It's a little difficult to see just because they're buried in here at the back, but if you just pry up on this, put some outward pressure on it by pulling, and then pry down on the lower one. There we go, that popped. Now that it's free, wiggle it until it slides off. And there it is. Now take your new switch and line it up. It's not going to go on unless it's actually properly lined up. There we go. As you get closer, it'll stop spinning and it's going to be lined up on its tracks. Press it until it locks and clicks in, just like this. You should not be able to pull this back off. Now let's just reverse the process. I'm going to get the wiper switch reinstalled here. It's going to have to line up on some tracks and then press it in until it clicks. Let's plug everything in. Turn signal switch, and then there were 2 connectors for the wiper switch here. These will go on the clock spring. Speaking of, let's put that on next. Take this and line it up. It's going to have 2 tabs on the side here that need to line up, and then just press it on until it clicks. It has 3 locking tabs that it clicks on. Now let's plug all these in. A blue connector, a black connector, and the yellow connector for the airbag. Everything needs to click in position. Now we're ready to put the steering wheel back on. Feed the airbag wires through the steering wheel. Line it up. Make sure the clock spring connector goes through. And now it is very important that you line up the splines here. Oh, there we go. That just fell on. If you're 1 tooth off on the splines, you'll know because it's actually going to sit quite crooked. So this would be 1 spline, another one. This is perfectly straight how I had it. Another one to the right is going to be like this, so I know for sure that I am lined up properly. Before I connect anything, let's put the mounting nut back on so this can't come off. Now that it's perfectly lined up, thread it on all the way. There was no thread locker on it when I took it off, so I'm not going to put any on. The torque for this is 37 foot-pounds. If you're unable to torque it, make it nice and snug by hand. That's it right there, nice and tight. Let's get these wires reconnected. I'm going to plug in the white one first, just so I can have a little bit more space for that. And then the main connector in the middle. Make sure they all click, and hook the harness onto these little hooks here so it can stay out of the way of the airbag. Speaking of airbag, let's plug it back in and reinstall it. Now you can very clearly see on the back of this airbag the 3 pins that lock it in. So this is what we were aiming to release when prying on those springs. It's just a little tab that holds onto these, so you want to make sure that when you install these, they all click in, all 3 of them. All right, let's take the airbag pad, press the connectors on, and make sure you lock the yellow clip. And don't forget about the horn connector. I'm going to flip it up right over here. Connect this, otherwise your horn will not sound when you press the horn pad. Make sure this clicks as well. All you have to do now is line it up and press it in position. There we go. At this point, you are safe to reconnect your battery if you wish to do so, and that's why I left these covers off so that I can inspect everything and test everything to make sure it all works, so that if I do have to go back and fix anything, the wires are actually all exposed and I can make sure that all my connections are good. Having said that, I've already double checked everything. It's all good. So now just stick the key in, turn the steering wheel so you can access the mounting points for these screws, and let's put the covers back on. All right, let's start putting all these covers back over. Get this lined up and get the bottom cover lined up as well. When you click them together, make sure they click and look seamless like this. The seam should be squished and glued together on both sides. Let's put in one of the screws. Nice and snug. Turn the steering wheel, do the same on the other side. Get these covers reinstalled. Make sure they're flush. Do the same to this one, of course. There we go. Now take your negative battery cable, put it back on the terminal. There may or may not be a tiny spark when you do this. If there is, don't be afraid, just keep it on there. It's not good to bounce it on and off, on and off. Take your 10mm wrench or socket, snug this up, and you know that it's tight when you're not able to spin this by hand anymore, so like this, not when the nut stops spinning. If you over tighten this, it'll stretch the terminal. If not, strip out the nut and then you'll have bigger issues. So this is nice and tight for me here. I can stop, and there we go, job is complete.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.